Hello, welcome back to Let's Just Talk About Social Justice, the show where I talk about social justice issues in America and what it takes to make a difference. I'm your host, Asia Goulis, and today we're diving into one of the most well-known issues facing families in the United States, the child care crisis. This episode draws on the PBS NewsHour documentary, Facing the Future 2021. Research from development science and a long history of gender and racialized labor in America that will connect these realities to major child development theories because children care isn't just an economic issue, it's a development one. Scene 1. What the documentary reveals about the crisis. The documentary makes one thing painfully clear. Childcare in the United States is not accessible, not affordable, and not valued. It's a system built on the assumption that mothers, specifically women, will absorb the cost, the labor, the sacrifice. One of the most striking examples in the film that I found is that the Black single mother of 5 who cannot afford childcare and must rely on her older siblings or her older children to take care of their younger siblings. This dynamic creates what research called parentification, a situation in which children take on adult caregiving responsibilities far too early. This is not a personal failure on her part, it's a structural failure created by a system that offers families few real options. The documentary also highlights the fragility of the voucher system. Families who exceeds their allotted children care hours by even 1 hour risk losing those subsidies entirely. Imagine having a choice between staying at home to keep your job or leaving early to keep your child care assistance. This is an impossible choice for many families that they face, not because they made the wrong decision, but because the system never gave them a meaningful choice to begin with. The structure itself set families up to fail. Scene 2. COVID exposed the truth. COVID-19 did not create the childcare issues, as many people think. It simply exposed a problem that has been building for generations. The pandemic acted as a spotlight, making the system's long-standing inequalities crystal clear because for the first time, the instability of underfunding childcare affected nearly everyone, which has previously been dismissed as an issue faced only by low-income families or single mothers, suddenly becoming visible as a structural failure rooted in decades of policy neglect and gender exploitation. This documentary illustrated this through the story of a woman who earned $500 per week working in childcare. When the pandemic hit, she lost her job. Her employment benefits increased to $772 per week. In other words, she earns more money not working. And when she did care for kids, this contrast raises a critical question that I had. How can a society claim that children are the future while paying the people who care for them less than they receive in unemployment benefits? Her experience reveals how deeply unvalued children care work is and how the system is structured to fail both workers and families. This devaluation is not accidental. Over 90% of children care workers are women. Many of it numbers are women of color. Historically, children caregivers' labor has been dismissed as unpaid precisely because it has associated with women and specifically with Black women who was forced to care for white children during slavery. As Glenn 1992 explained, the racialization and gender history continues to shape the low wage and low status of children care work today. Research reinforced this pattern. Childcare workers on average about only $12 an hour, often without benefits, despite performing work that is foundational to caregiving, children development, and the broader economics. Whiteboard 2018. These wages reflect not only the importance of work, but the historical and ongoing devaluation of caregiving labels, a pattern rooted in gender and racialized assumption who performs care and what the label is worth. Scene 3. Intersectionality and who gets hurt the most. Intersectionality, as we discussed in earlier episodes, which was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, helps us understand why the burden of inaccessibility childcare falls hardest on certain groups. These groups include low-income families, Black families, other families of color, and single mothers. They face the steepest barriers to access high-quality childcare, and when childcare is unavailable, women employment drops while men employment remains largely unchanged. Lagar 2020. This pattern highlights the deep-rooted misogyny that shapes the system, particularly towards women and women of color. This documentary also shows how child care in the United States is framed as a private responsibility, a belief rooted in long-standing American ideology that placed the primary responsibility of childbearing on mothers. This framework creates a clear class division. Wealthy families get high quality care, and working class are left with limited, unstable, and low quality options. In other words, the system is designed in a way that reinforces inequality rather than reducing it. Scene 4. How this connects to child development theories. Now I'm going to talk about how this family and child care relates to child care development theories. Bronfenbrenner, for example, his ecological system theory may help us explain how the failure of the United States childcare system directly shapes childcare development. Childcare sits within the microsystem, the immediate environment for children experience daily interaction with caregivers, but the quality and stability of the microsystem are heavily influenced by the exosystem, which as parent employment policies, unpredicted work schedule, and availability of subsidies. Even broader cultural beliefs in macro system includes gender expectation that mothers should provide unpaid care and a racialized assumption about who performs childcare labor, shapes how society funds, values, and structures early childcare programs. When policies in these outer system fail, the consequences cascade inwards. Children experience unstable routines, inconsistent caregivers, and reduced access to enriching environment. Bronfenbrenner model makes that development outcomes not simply the result of family choices, but is shaped by the interconnection system that either supports or undermines early experiences. Bronfenbrenner, 1979. The second theory that I'm connecting to is Vasco sociocultural theory. Vasco sociocultural theory, sorry if I say his name wrong, emphasizes the children learning through social interaction, guiding participation in language in which exchange with more knowledge than others. High quality childcare systems typically provide these supports through intentional scaffolding, peer collaboration with responding adults' guidance, but when children are placed in unstable, low quality care, or when older siblings has to take that role of caregiving due to the gaps in the childcare system, they loses the accessibility to structured social learning that Vasco identified as essential for cognitive development. These disputations limit opportunities for children to develop language, problem-solving skills, and self-regulation within the zones of proximal development. Velosky, 1978. This also connects to attachment theory. Attachment theory highlights the importance of consistent and responsive caregiving for the development of secure emotional bonds. Stable childcare arrangement can support these by providing predictable routines instead of interaction with trusted adults. However, when a family loses access to childcare because of regulative voucher rules and fluctuating work schedules, or program closing, or children experience instability, they can undermine the sense of security. Frequent change in the caregiving environment can contribute to stress, anxiety, death-conforming secure attachment. Outcomes the attachment theories argues have a long-term implications for emotional and social development. Bumble in 1969. This also connects to a reading by Gershoff, 2023, Children Poverty as Limited Context. They argue, and the other authors argue, that child poverty creates limiting context for development by distributing the stability children need to thrive. Poverty often produces inconsistent routine, chaotic environment, and limited caregiving availability, condition that restricts children's cognitive, social, and emotional growth. The document illustrates these patterns clearly. Parents lose subsidies when they work hour shifts. Children are placed in low-quality centers. They accept vouchers. The older siblings are forced to take care of the caregiving responsibility. These are not the results of individual shortcomings, but the structural barriers that symptomatically undermine children's development opportunities. Gershoff and colleagues emphasize that when social policy fails to support families, children bear the development consequences. Scene 5. Policies Roots, Policy Failures. The document traces today childcare crisis back to 1971, the Comprehensive Child Development Act, a landmark bill that would have created a universal child care across the United States. But the bill passed the Congress with support, but President Nixon, under the influence of conservative advisories and political people, vetoed it. The fear was not about cost, it was about culture. Expanding childcare threatened traditional gender norms by enabling women, especially white middle-class women, to pursue paid work outside home. Let's talk about how they don't even consider women of color. The veto framed childcare as a private responsibility rather than a public good. Community belief that caregiving belongs in the middle home of the shoulder of the mothers, the moment sets trajectory for fragment underfunded system we see today. The legacy is still visible. Only 1 in 7 eligible children receive the child care subsidy. U.S. Department of Health Human Services 2020, and the subsidies does not exist often, unstable, punitive, and insignificant. Families lose support when the workout shifts, centers close due to little funding, and the parents are forced to impossible choices. This is not simply poor policy design; it's a reflection of misogyny embedded in law, a system built on the assumption that women unpaid labor will fill the gaps when public supports fails. Scene 6. What does this mean for the future of children? When we fail families, we fail children. And when we devalue child care workers, we devalue childhood itself. Developmental science is clear. Child thrives in stable, nurturing, high-quality environment. Parent thrives when they are supported. Society thrives when caregiving is valued. Yes, the United States child care system does the opposite. It relies on instability, underfunded, and an assumption that mothers will absorb the cost when the system collapses. But it doesn't have to be this way. Many countries treat childcare as essential infrastructure, just as fundamental as roads, schools, and hospitals. When we could choose to do the same, doing so requires confronting the misogynist belief that has shaped policies for decades. The idea that women primarily placed in its home, that the labor is limited and unpaid, and that their ambitions are secondary. Why shouldn't a woman success in a career be recognized as a mother in the same way a man is celebrated for working and fathering? A childcare system would value caregiving, support families, and give all children not just the wealthy environment they deserve. Scene 7. Reflection. While watching this documentary, it helped me understand the deep historical roots of today's child crisis. I always knew that childcare was not so great in the United States and it was difficult to access, but I did not know that it was because of deep-rooted misogyny and how policies were built on that belief that women should stay at home, providing unlabeled, and limit their ambitions. Learning this history made the current crisis make sense in a painful way. This topic also resonated with me personally because it showed how child development is shaped by forces far beyond home. Bronfenbrenner ecological system theory made this especially clear. The decisions in the macro system, like Nixon's veto of the 1974 Comprehensive Child Development Act, directly shaped the microsystem of children's daily lives. It raises a simply but frustrating question. Why are we still trapped in outdated gender norms and misogynistic thinking? Sadly, I know the answer. Our system was built within the patriarchal framework, one that never centered women and never valued caregiving and never imagined equality. Even when the United States was created, the founding language of this country was that it was included in who was not. When America declared that all men are created equal, women was never part of that vision. This specifically reminds me of the Hamilton musical when Angelica Schuyler's iconic line says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." And when I meet Thomas Jefferson, I'm compelled him to include women in the sequel work. Her line is playful, but it exposed the real truth. Women has always had to fight to be written in the story, to be recognized as equal, to be valued, and the struggle continues today in our childcare system, which still operates on the assumption that women's labor is limitless, unpaid, and invisible. This whole issue frustrates me deeply as I am a caregiver for my sister, and it just makes you think and understand why so many people are choosing not to have children and why the U.S. birth rates is the lowest it has ever been. When families receive so little support and when children care is treated as a private burden instead of a public responsibility, it becomes harder to imagine raising a child in a system that offers little help. But the childcare crisis is not inevitable. It's the result of political, economic, and cultural choices. That means we can choose differently. If we want children to flourish, if we want families to thrive, and if we want a future to build on equity rather than inequality, the children care must become a public priority, not a private struggle. Thanks for joining me today. Until next time, take care.